When we talked about the apocalyptic, the worst case scenario, if we have an extended drought, some of our communities that have a vulnerable water supply would have to leave. We can look back in history and see times, during the 30s where there was massive migration of people, where whole towns have to be relocated. And massive environmental damage to the farmland, which hadn't been managed in a way that could survive under those conditions. That was what we were talking about.
The prairies are a place that have always experienced a really, really wide range of weather. We have floods, we have droughts, and those are normal and part of natural cycles. Climate change is making those extremes more extreme. So the wet times are getting wetter and the dry times are getting drier. And that threatens both the health of the ecosystems as well as a lot of the things that we depend on water for.
It's difficult to link one particular year to climate change directly, but certainly the frequency and the magnitude of those kinds of events could affect water management and everything that water management is linked to that people rely on. It could be recreational fishing, subsistence fishing, environment, municipal use, irrigation or agriculture, big mining operations or industrial, all of those things.
On the prairies, we have more water evaporating up to the atmosphere than we do falling down as rain. So that means that we're constantly in a deficit situation. That makes it a challenge to manage what water we have in a careful and responsible way. The prairies are really flat because we're at the bottom of an ancient lake. And so that means that there's this huge area of the continent that all drains into Lake Winnipeg and then ultimately out into Hudson Bay.
The watersheds can be drawn on any scale you want to. You can draw them like the size of your yard if you wanted to. Those smaller watersheds they're stackable. So you basically take all the small little watersheds upstream and you build them up together and they go downstream until the water ends up at the Hudson Bay, along with water from Ontario and the rest of the Prairie provinces. So it's a huge system and everything is interrelated as you move from upstream to downstream. Climate change impacts and glacial melting and all of those issues in the mountains can have an impact hundreds of kilometers downstream on the water regime and the water quality that's experienced by the ecosystem and the people that live there.
That watershed is facing a variety of threats. So because this is an area where a lot of the food in Canada is grown, many of the natural wetlands that would have been here in the past have been drained for agricultural purposes or have been modified so that the water flows in ways that supports agriculture. And all of that can make managing those extremes, the floods and the droughts, much more difficult.
Often we delineate watersheds based on where we measure the runoff in a river, but the prairies are different than a lot of other places in that a large area of the prairies is not naturally drained into streams. That's why across the prairie pothole region we have all these wetlands that have formed everywhere.
Wetlands are like nature's kidneys. They help to filter out nutrients and other pollutants as the water moves through them. Wetlands on the prairies are threatened by climate change. Wetlands depend on recharge from rain and from snow or from groundwater, and so as we alter both temperature and precipitation patterns, that changes the water balance in wetlands and threatens all of those important functions. One of the challenges with managing water is that water doesn't care about political boundaries. You can't manage water by province or by town or even by country, and that's because the watersheds span all of those boundaries. So that is challenging because it means we need to talk to each other. It means the people in Manitoba need to talk to the people in Saskatchewan, need to talk to the people in North Dakota in order to protect the water resources across the whole watershed.
Certainly you can easily look at other jurisdictions where the available supplies is getting pushed to the edge, and that's when things get risky for everybody. Certainly then there can be the potential for conflict between users over a scarce resource.
These extremes, the floods and the droughts, impact humans in ways that are not fair across society. The floods in particular are really damaging for remote communities. If there's a big flood, maybe your community gets evacuated, and when you return, there's all kinds of damage from the flood. The problems with flooding are a human rights issue because it disrupts people's right to clean water, right to a livelihood, right to a safe home.
Often it's the environment that doesn't have the most vocal voice for it in the competing demands. That's where my concern was always to try and give that voice to the environment so it can be considered in the decision-making process. On the Saskatchewan River system, we had endangered lake sturgeon populations there that we were already concerned might not be getting the spring flows high enough to trigger their spawning events. If we change the flow regime significantly by removing a bunch of that spring flow, say for irrigation or something like that, that we could get into a situation where they just didn't receive the triggers to spawn and the population just became big old fish and no young fish coming into it. If you change the system, it'll affect us beyond just those individual species that are making up that ecosystem. You know, as we move forward, we need to be thinking more about how to make the ecosystem more stable, especially when you're looking forward 50 years, because there's certainly significant potential for a negative impact. We need to be making our best efforts to work those changes that are coming into our decision-making because it's in all of our best interests to do that. Can't really draw everything as a direct benefit to me as a human.
We depend on the land very heavily here, and particularly we depend on the water. And sometimes we use the water in ways that push the limit of what the system can handle. And so it's important to us as we move into the future and think about managing these water resources to do so in a way that ensures that we're good stewards of the land, to do so in a way that ensures that we protect the beauty and the biodiversity that we love on the prairies.